Today, we've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. Charles and Ivanka had been married for several years. From the outside, they looked like a normal couple, two people building a life together. But behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Their marriage was far from easy. Arguments had become a routine, some over small things, some over bigger issues. But they all seemed to point to one truth. There was a growing disconnect between them. Charles, despite everything, loved his wife deeply. He wasn't perfect, but he did his best to provide for their future. They had been saving for a house, a goal that Charles held onto like a lifeline. He imagined a future where they could finally settle into a place they could call their own. But Ivanka saw things differently. One evening, it started like any other argument, small, almost insignificant. Charles had just come home from work, exhausted, looking forward to a quiet evening. But the tension was already in the air. Ivanka had asked for something, and Charles had reminded her they would not be able to afford it at the moment. Ivanka was not buying the excuse. And as always, the argument quickly turned into something else, something bigger, deeper, and much more painful. Ivanka's tone was sharp. It's easy for her to make Charles feel like he was always the problem, like he wasn't doing enough, even when he was giving his all. "Why do I have to explain this to you over and over again?" she snapped, rolling her eyes. Charles tried to stay calm, to keep his voice steady. "Ivanka, I'm trying here. I really am. But it feels like nothing I do is ever enough for you." Ivanka let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Trying? That's what you call this? This isn't trying, Charles. This is just you doing the bare minimum and expecting me to be grateful for it." The words cut deeper than she realized. Charles could feel his frustration bubbling under the surface. "Bare minimum?" he repeated. He wanted to remind her of everything he had done, the long hours, the savings, the sacrifices. But what was the point? It wouldn't change anything. Ivanka's dismissive attitude stung the most. She didn't care. Charles felt his patience snap. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door. He needed air, space, anything but this suffocating feeling of never being enough. "I can't do this right now," he muttered under his breath as he walked out, leaving Ivanka standing there unfazed. He had no idea that this night was about to change everything. Charles had barely made it down the street before he realized his mistake. In his rush to leave, he had forgotten his wallet and card on the kitchen counter. Annoyed at himself, but knowing he couldn't go far without it, he turned around and headed back home. When he got home, he pushed the door open as quietly as possible, not wanting to trigger another argument just yet. But the moment he stepped inside, he heard Ivanka's voice. She was on the phone. At first, he wasn't paying attention. He was only focused on grabbing his wallet and leaving before she noticed he was back. But then, her words stopped him cold in his tracks. "I settled for less." A chill ran down his spine. His heartbeat picked up, hammering against his ribs as his fingers hovered over his wallet. "I should have been with Declan, but I needed stability." Charles felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She continued, "Charles is a good man, but not the one I truly wanted from the start." At that moment, everything made sense to Charles. The way her affection always seemed forced. The arguments, the cold distance between them, the way she always seemed like she was enduring their marriage instead of living in it. It wasn't just about money. It never was. She meant emotionally, too. She had never been in love with him the way he was with her. Charles picked up his wallet and card from the living room and walked out of the house, shutting the door behind him without making a sound. The night air was cool against the skin, but it did nothing to numb the sharp sting of what he had just heard. He didn't know where he was going at first. His feet carried him down the familiar streets. Eventually, he found himself at a bar. It wasn't one he usually went to, but that didn't matter. He just needed somewhere to sit, somewhere to think, somewhere to let the truth sink in without it suffocating him completely. He ordered a beer, took a sip, and let the bitterness settle on his tongue. But it couldn't compare to the bitterness he felt inside. Ivanka had never truly wanted him. He had spent years fighting for a future with her, believing that their struggles were temporary, that their love, his love, was worth every sacrifice. But it had all been meaningless. She had settled, and in doing so, had unknowingly trapped him in a marriage built on nothing but convenience. The thought of confronting her crossed his mind. But what was the point? What would he say? That he knew the truth? That he had heard every word? She might apologize, maybe even cry, but it wouldn't change the fact that her heart had never belonged to him. As he stared at the amber liquid in his glass, a quiet yet drastic decision formed in his mind. He would leave. Not just for the night, not just to cool off, but for good. He would disappear, erase every trace of himself from her life, and give her exactly what she wanted: the freedom to be with whoever she truly desired. There was no reason to stay. No reason to fight for something that had never been real. He ordered another beer, letting the decision settle deep within him. This was the last night he would spend as Ivanka's husband. By morning he would be gone. That night, while Ivanka slept, Charles sat in the dim glow of his laptop screen. If she wanted to be with another man, he wouldn't stand in her way. But he also wouldn't leave empty-handed. He logged into their joint savings account. It wasn't difficult. He had always been the one managing their finances. The numbers stared back at him. They had been saving to buy a house. He took what was his 80% of the funds, the portion he had single-handedly contributed. But instead of withdrawing cash, he moved the money strategically, purchasing resellable assets online. Electronics, rare collectibles, and valuable items that could easily be liquidated later. He left nothing to chance. Once the transactions were complete, he cleared any trace of them from his emails, ensuring that Ivanka wouldn't be able to track his next moves. Then he turned his attention to what came next. With quiet efficiency, Charles packed only the essentials: important documents, enough clothes to last for a while, anything that could help him rebuild elsewhere. He had no intention of taking anything sentimental. There was nothing here worth holding onto anymore. Before leaving, he sat at the desk, staring at the blank sheet of paper in front of him. He didn't need many words. The truth had already been spoken, just not to his face. He picked up a pen and wrote with a steady hand. "I overheard everything. I won't stand in the way of your happiness. Go settle with your ideal partner." No accusations. No confrontation. Just a final goodbye. By morning, Charles was gone. Ivanka woke up expecting another ordinary morning. Her eyes landed on the note when she got out of bed. It sat on the table, waiting for her. The moment she read the words, her stomach dropped. He knew. Panic surged through her veins when she realized he had left. Not for a few hours, not to cool off, but for good. And worst of all, she had pushed him to this, without even realizing it. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone, dialing his number, waiting, hoping. But the line was disconnected. She tried again, and again. Nothing. Her fingers moved quickly, opening her email. She typed a message, keeping it short. But when she hit send, the response was immediate. Undelivered. Her breathing became uneven as she checked social media, scrolling through her contacts, and searching for his profile. Completely erased. It was as if he had never been there at all. Desperation creeping in, she called his workplace, thinking maybe, just maybe, he had gone there, but they never picked up. Hours of trying later, the receptionist answered, and Ivanka forced her voice to stay steady as she asked about Charles. The response came back casual. "Oh, Charles? He resigned this morning. Sent an email before office hours. Effective immediately." Ivanka's grip tightened on the phone. He had planned this. This wasn't some impulsive reaction to their argument. He had been deliberate, thoughtful. He had taken the time to erase every trace of himself from her world. He had vanished, leaving her with nothing but a note and the consequences of her own words. She had spent so long believing Charles was just there, but now standing alone in an empty house, staring at the last thing he had ever left for her. She realized she had finally pushed him too far, and there was nothing she could do to take it back. With Charles gone, Ivanka no longer had to hide. There was no need for secrecy, no need to pretend. She turned fully to Declan, the man she had considered her true choice all along. The affair, which had once existed in whispers and stolen moments, was now out in the open. No husband was standing in the way, no guilt weighing on her conscience. At first, it felt like everything had fallen into place. Declan said all the right things, made her feel desired, and reassured her that she had made the right decision. With him, there was passion, excitement, and a sense of freedom that she believed Charles could never offer. This was the life she had wanted, the life she felt she deserved. A few months after Charles vanished, Ivanka took the final step to erase him from her life completely. She filed for divorce, fully convinced that he would never return. Since he was nowhere to be found, the court issued a default judgment in her favor. Just like that, she was legally single, free to move forward without looking back. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But as time passed, cracks began to show. Declan was charming, but he was distant. He was present in the way that mattered least, in words, in surface-level affection. But when it came to real commitment, he was absent. He avoided serious conversations about the future, always changing the subject whenever she brought it up. Then, the truth began to unfold. Ivanka discovered that Declan was not as devoted to her as she had assumed. He still entertained other women, and still maintained relationships outside of theirs. What she had thought was a deep, passionate love turned out to be nothing more than a convenient arrangement for him. She had left a man who had given her his all for someone who never intended to offer her the same. The comparisons began. The things she once resented about Charles now resurfaced in a different light. Charles, despite their many arguments, had always been reliable. He had been present, not just physically, but emotionally. Even when they fought, he had stayed, fought for their marriage, and believed in their future. He had sacrificed his comfort, his dreams, and even his finances to build something solid with her. Declan, on the other hand, had given her nothing but temporary excitement. There were no real sacrifices, no stability, no certainty in what they were building because, in truth, they had been building nothing at all. And then, the realization hit her. She had never truly settled for less. She had thrown away something real for an illusion. What she had with Charles was not perfect, but it was genuine. What she had with Declan was everything she thought she wanted, but it was never meant to last. Years had passed. Ivanka was still single. The man she once believed was her true love, her ideal partner, never became what she expected. Declan, the man she thought she should have chosen from the start, avoided any real conversation about marriage. Whenever she brought it up, he brushed it off, changed the subject, or outright dismissed it. At first, she told herself it was just timing, that he wasn't ready yet. Eventually, he would commit to her the way she had left everything behind for him. But as the years dragged on, it became harder to ignore the truth staring her in the face. Declan was never serious about her. The reality hit like a slow, painful drip. She had left her marriage thinking she was choosing real love, but she had only become one of his many side pieces. Whenever they argued about it, Declan never held back from reminding her of one thing. "I never asked you to leave your husband." That sentence cut her every time. It left her humiliated, angry, but most of all regretful. Because he was right. He never promised her forever. He never asked her to walk away from Charles. That had been her choice, a choice she could never take back. And now, every now and then, she found herself thinking about Charles. Where was he now? Did he move on? Did he find someone new? Did he build the life they once planned, but with another woman? These thoughts came in waves, creeping up on her when she least expected them. The more she ignored them, the stronger they became. She had a man who loved her, a man who wanted to build a life with her, and she threw it all away for someone who never saw her as more than an option. And that's the story. So, What can we learn from this? Sometimes, we don't realize the value of what we have until it's gone. It's easy to overlook the efforts of someone who truly cares, only to regret it when they are no longer there. People often chase what they think they want, believing that something or someone better is waiting for them. But in the end, they come to realize that they had what they needed all along. Words have power. The things we say about our partners, especially in moments when we think they aren't listening, can either strengthen or completely break a relationship. Love isn't just about emotions or excitement. It's about trust, respect, and genuine companionship. If those things are missing, no amount of passion can make up for it. If you don't appreciate someone's presence, you may have to deal with their absence. Charles walked away, not out of anger, but because he understood that staying in a place where he wasn't truly wanted would only cause more harm. Some people believe in fighting for love no matter what. Others know when it's time to let go. So, what do you think? Do you believe Charles made the right decision by leaving, or should he have stayed and fought for his marriage? Let us know in the comments below.